But there's another one out there too. It's called energy conflict, right? I mean, if you work a hard shift, you're wiped out. Let's say you didn't sleep for 24 hours and you go home. How are you feeling? Are you irritable? Do you have the energy that those little children, if you have a family that, or teenagers or spouse, they're looking for? So we have that energy.
Stay tuned. Coming up, it's part one of a two-part interview with Dr. Donnie Hutchinson as we explore the health and wellness qualities that make for a successful first responder at work and at home. Hello and welcome to the Situational Awareness Matters Show, episode 365. I'm your host, Rich Gassaway. The purpose of this show is to improve situational awareness and decision-making for individuals and teams who work in high-risk, high-consequence, time-compressed environments with changing conditions. The SA Matters mission is simple. We want to help you see the bad things coming in time to prevent bad outcomes. Today's feature segment is sponsored by Gassaway Virtual Training. There are 33 online training programs for you to choose from. Some of those programs are live events presented virtually, and some of them are pre-recorded programs. To learn more, visit samatters.com website and click on the Virtual Training tab. All right, let's jump into our feature segment and part one of my two-part interview with Dr. Donnie Hutchinson. Hey everyone, welcome to the Situational Awareness Matters Show. I'm your host, Rich Gassaway. Today I have a really special guest and almost like a return of a favor because Dr. Donnie had me on a guest on his show, and we'll talk a little bit about his show and the focus of his show. And I realized that what he is working with first responders is very pertinent to the topic of situational awareness. It really doesn't necessarily have to do with near misses and line of duty deaths at incident scenes, but definitely could have a connection to causation for near misses and line of duty deaths, both on and off the job. So I'm super happy to have him. Dr. Donnie explores the health and wellness qualities that make for good, successful first responders and firefighters, both at work and at home. He teaches how and why firefighters and first responders need to put their physical, psychological, social, and spiritual needs first. Dr. Donnie educates first responders that the greater they care for themselves, the better they will be able to serve their communities and their families. His education process includes using interactive activities and discussions to identify how and what are important to firefighters' lives, and how to begin aligning your day-to-day behaviors with your priorities in life. Dr. Donnie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Rich.
It's great to have you. Before we dig into some questions that I have for you, let's give us a walk down memory lane and tell us a little bit about your history and how it is that you came into this passion topic for first responders.
Oh, yeah. Well, the history of it, I sort of felt, Rich, is that I always I was thinking I wanted to lead a life of balance. And balance for me back in the day was, I sort of divvied it up in four pillars, if you will. It was faith, family, career, and health. And I thought, if I take care of those four things, focus on that, faith, family, career, and health, I'll probably feel like I'm living a pretty good life and feel balanced, And it always stuck with me. And then throughout my career, when I was running organizations as president of different companies, and I had had a team and a team of managers, it was like, hey guys, by the way, I am going to be home for dinner pretty much every night by 6:00. And at first they're like, you can't do that as an executive. You just can't do that. And I was like, no, I'm going to. It's important to me, you know. But then it was, but I want you all to do the same. And then I want you to work with your staff to make sure they're home too. You know, we need to figure out how to divvy up the work so that we can work in a nice manner. And I said, you know, I can come in at 4 a.m. to catch up because my family's sleeping, but I wanted to spend that time with them at home. So it's one of those things I just sort of developed this concept, and being a former college athlete, and I was also in the Army National Guard, you know, fitness was always a piece of my life. And I just carried that over into my professional adult career. But then it was, I started teaching at the University of Dayton in the MBA school, which I understand someone knows a little bit about UD.
Yes, I am an alumni. There's my UD diploma right there.
Yes. Have to give the plug there for UD.
Yeah, right on.
You know, I started teaching for them, and it was funny. The students, when I was telling them, I said, "Oh, I've always had this book in me, you know, to write about balance and things like that." And I was actually giving them a lecture on don't let things hold you back in your career. You know, don't put a ceiling on yourself. And I was giving them this whole lecture about what they ought to do. And then they turned it around on me and said, well, what's stopping you from writing your book?
No.
And I was like, I mean, it stopped me in my tracks. It really did. I went home that night and I decided I'm going to write a book. You know, it was just one of those things to where, you know, so shortly after that, I produced the book, became #1 Amazon bestseller. And then the International Association of Firefighters, Mr. Vinci, he contacted me. He heads up the educational component of the annual ALTS conference that they do. And I'm sure you've probably been to some in your career. You know, they contacted me and said, hey, we saw your book and we have a need to bring a work-life balance educator in to teach firefighters at our conference, and we'd like to interview you. And I said that, yeah, it'd be great. I'd love the opportunity. And so they interviewed me and asked me what my approach was and shared with them what my approach was with it. And they really liked it. And I've been doing that for the past 5 years at their annual conferences. And then, as you know, after you do sort of one big event, then all of a sudden people come up to you and say, hey, you know, I loved it. You know, can you come out to my department and train us? And so it led into that several years ago to where I started going out doing different trainings. And then one thing led to another, and it spilled over actually into law enforcement as well. But I'll tell you the ironic thing about this, Rich, is that where I grew up as a kid, I grew up like your previous guest in Southwest Ohio. And I grew up in this firefighter John Moore. And where I grew up, though, it was in these apartments. That was the very poor section of the poor school district neighborhood that just outside of Dayton. And I tell this story because I saw you guys down there all the time, you and law enforcement. You know, in the summertime, I'm playing outside as a kid every day, literally every day. I'd see you guys down in the neighborhood, picking someone up, doing something. But some of the things that I saw as a kid was just, traumatic. Seeing, body bags come out of an apartment, things like that is, you know what I'm talking about, and all your listeners do as well. But it's so ironic that years later in my adult life, who am I serving? I'm serving the men and women that I looked up to as a kid, as the heroes, of the neighborhood, the ones that you wanted to gravitate towards. And I think about it today, and I share those stories with my kids, and it's truly an honor to serve, public safety officers. Yeah.
What defines work-life balance for a first responder? Is it the faith, family, career, health? Or
that was mine. That was what I sort of guided mine on. And what I ended up doing is I took that framework, and I received my PhD later in life. So just a couple years ago, I finished that dissertation, and the research was actually, it was driven from my book, the concepts. But what I did is, Rich, is I studied self-care and the attributes, or how does self-care affect one's work-life balance? And when I talk about self-care, there are four pieces that I studied, and it was, how well we do with our physical care, such as our exercise, our nutrition, our sleep, which we know is an issue, sleep, big time issue with firefighters. Our psychological care, whether it's talking to, for firefighters, are we speaking to a culturally competent therapist? Are we using peer support? Things like that. And then I did social care as well as spiritual care. So spiritual could be anything from prayer to meditation to walking in nature. But I studied this on 5 independent case studies on these 5 different people, that what I found and what the model came out as is that they all did an outstanding job of taking care of their self-care needs. I mean, it is, if they didn't eat right, they didn't have the energy that day, or if they ate too much, they didn't have the energy. There was all these different relationships and how things spilled over from one role in their life into another. But what the model came out to be and what it showed is that they all took great care of their self-care, and they were all very effective in their careers and in their family relationships. And it was so interesting when you talk about situational awareness matters, that they were all, they had self-perception, self-awareness of, wow, what works well for me? Like if I don't get enough sleep, I know I'm irritable. They were aware of it and conscious of it and tried to make decisions to change it a little bit, right? But so work-life balance for me, it followed that self-care, and then how well we do with our families and how well we do with our careers. And when I say work-life balance, a lot of times people say, oh, we can't, as first responders, we don't have balance. We work 24-hour shifts, or some work 48-hour shifts and things like that. But it's not about balancing how much work you do or how much time you spend with family. For me, it's all about, hey, what are your priorities in life? And are your daily behaviors in alignment with those priorities in life? Because this, I mean, I think a lot of people, we all know this, is that there are 2 timeless priorities that, these are priorities that have stood the test of time. If you don't have your health, what do you really have? Health is definitely a priority in people's lives, whether they wish to acknowledge it or not. We need our health if we want to live, right? And live in a good manner. And then those close personal relationships, which is generally, we're talking about family, we're talking about a spouse, or we're talking about children, those close personal relationships. Those 2 things that are priorities in human beings across the world, those have been priorities from day one. And so as I tell people in my workshops, it's like, I'm not here to tell you what your priorities ought to be, but I'll tell you what 2 of them have stood the test of time. And it's those close personal relationships and one's health. Yeah.
As I think about balance, I personally somehow envision, maybe because I'm a visual thinker, I envision scales in like the scales of justice and scales being in balance. And then as I think about work and life balance, I think about what is it that we're trying to balance on these scales. And as you were talking, I wrote down 2 things that if I were to think for myself, that I have to find balance with faith and family and career and health, that those 2 things that I'm trying to find balance with is time and the time commitment to each of those things. And I'm not professing, this is leading to a question. And time being one of those things that I need to balance, and then passion for those 4 things in the need to balance. Like somebody who's heavily passionate about their career might be less passionate about their family. And I'll give you an example of this. As I was interviewing someone on my show, and I'm so thankful that we had not hit the record button yet. This person was talking about their passion for the fire service and how they put the commitment to a person who might be trapped inside of a fire. They put that person's concern ahead of their own, even if it means they're going to lose their the firefighter is going to lose his life trying to save somebody, even if you can't save them. You know, sometimes we arrive on the scene and you can't save everyone. I mean, we know that there wouldn't be fire fatalities if we could save everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And he was making this argument that he would die trying to save everyone. And I said to him, thankfully, again, the recording was not on. I said, well, what would your family say about that? And he said, well, let's just put it this way. My family isn't my first priority.
Mm.
And that, connecting it to what you're talking about with this balance and the balance of passion, clearly career passion. And this person was very passionate about their career, no doubt about it. Maybe to the level that even made me uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But their passion then for family was what I would say way out of balance. So the question is time and passion what we're trying to bring balance to, or is there other dimensions that we're trying to balance in addition to or otherwise to time and passion for faith and family and career and health?
Yeah, no, that's a great question and great story. One that, he will, as we all know, we know what the outcome of that will be later in life. It'll be regret.
Mm.
Yeah. Right. And so when we think of time and passion, time is what actually, it's one of three sort of universal conflicts of work-life balance. Time is one of those, and a big one, that we can't be in two places at the same time, So time is definitely it. But there's another one out there too. It's called energy conflict, right? I mean, after you work a hard shift, you're wiped out. Let's say you didn't sleep for 24 hours and you go home. How are you feeling? Are you irritable? Do you have the energy that those little children, if you have a family or teenagers or spouse, they're looking for? So we have that energy. And I'll stop at those. Well, third one, just for the record, is that it's a behavioral conflict. Those behaviors that we have at work sometimes don't work well in the home, and vice versa. This is bi-directional. Sometimes behaviors we have in the home that may not work very well at work, but your passion is spot on when it comes to when we think about priorities in life. We're passionate about careers. And we have a culture that embraces that. It's work, work, work. Climb the corporate, whether it's a corporate ladder where, or we're in the fire service or we're in law enforcement, it's work, work, do everything you can. But we want to try to channel that passion. And that's where I coach and try to teach on, is that channel that passion, because our priorities in life, they ebb and flow all the time. There's a time you're up for promotional, you're going to study for the promotional exam. You got to put in the time, right? You don't get to become chief by accident, right? I mean, you got to put in the time, but you also, so you're passionate about that, but then it's healthy, of course, to be passionate about other things, such as when the person said family did not come first. We know he's going to regret that, but it's like anything of a good thing, too much of something good always turns into bad. I mean, we may like to eat, you like to drink, you need to stay hydrated, but you can actually take in too much water, right? And cause damage. So anything of a good thing is bad. So if we have too much passion just solely in our career and we're just siloed in career, then other things start to fall apart. And then when your family falls apart, we know that then you start losing, you lose a lot in that, a tremendous amount, but you also, you're losing resiliency, because I think there are nice studies out there that show that, the more secure and better, the effective the family unit is, the more resilient you can bring to your career. And, so there's a lot of things that we lose. So it's just one of those things, like when you say time and passion, it's absolutely, where do you place that time? Where do you place that passion in those priorities? And what I always urge, Rich, people to look at is that, hey, you say these are your priorities over here, these are your priorities. And then just self-assess, hey, what are my daily behaviors? Do they support those priorities? Because unfortunately, I think a lot of times we run through life, whether you're in firefighter, any first responder, or just any career, we run through life sometimes so darn fast. We don't stop and check, hey, what are my priorities? So that's where I'd like to try to steer people, is to try to keep those priorities top of mind so that you can reflect on them and assess yourself. If exercise is a priority, you say, or if someone says, hey, good health is a priority of mine. Yeah. Are you exercising? It's a legitimate question. Yeah. So that's where I like your time and passion, because you're right, that passion is key. But of course, we want to balance that passion. Spread it out with all the priorities in life, because we can do more than one thing well. That's what I think the biggest myth is that we as people need to choose. We're going to either be successful in a career, or we're going to be successful outside of a career. I say that's a myth. The more successful you are as a whole person, I think the more successful you are in a career as well. And the studies are starting to show that too.
Yeah. So, what are some of the signs or symptoms or indicators that a firefighter's work-life balance might be out of balance?
Yeah. Well, there can be several. I mean, if we think of it as how well are we doing with our self-care needs, we could start there, because I think that's one of the most critical components. When we look at our physical care, how well are we taking care of ourselves? We can start with, the exercise. We can start with the sleep, the nutrition, the preventive health. Cancer is such of a huge issue. Cardiovascular disease is such of a huge issue. And our psychological health, right? Our how well are we doing with the trauma, the stress, and are we eating healthy, not just in the firehouse, but outside of the firehouse? There's a new study just released from, I think it's called Advanced Recovery. I read it quickly before the show we started taping here. Is that alcohol use disorder? Substantial issue in the fire service. So if anytime you see someone, whether they're using alcohol too much, or they're not spending time with their family, or they come a little bit distant, or they're not talking about their family, or they're volunteering for every overtime shift that they can possibly get. Now, granted, again, ebb and flow. There's sometimes it's like, hey, I have a goal. I need to make this amount of money, I'm having a child head off to college. So within the next year, I want to work as much overtime as I can, or we're going to build a home, or whatever it may be. All good stuff, good priorities. I don't really call that out of balance. But if you start thinking, oh, I'm going to work as much overtime as I possibly can all the way for 20 years 25 years until I retire, you may be missing something, So it's ebb and flow again, though. I think is a big key of how do you focus, and what do you focus on?
I've talked to some firefighters who say, they work their 24 or their 48-hour shift, and then they come home, and as soon as they get home from this shift, they're coming home to I don't know if the term is chaos and mayhem, but the kids are excited because the parent is home and they want to play and they want to show them things that they've been working on the last 24 hours and all this and all. And the firefighter is thinking, I just need some time to decompress. I love my family, but there has to be, I don't know, this transition between that high stress, high vigilant work mode, and then coming home and kind of changing hats into the parent mode is sometimes challenging. Is there any advice for that?
Yeah, it is challenging. I mean, there's no doubt. You're worn out, physically, emotionally, probably sleep deprived, many. And now you have people that want your attention, and you have probably someone that wants you to take over some responsibilities in the home. In that formula, it's usually not set up for success. When I had some firefighters that told me stories on my show, is that one of them said, as soon as he gets home, he informed his family, hey, I need a new routine. So here's what's going to happen. As soon as I get home, I'm going to already be in my change of clothes that I want. I'm going to drop my stuff off. And he would, if he wasn't exhausted, he would go out for a run. And it was his time. He told me, he goes, I would run 2 miles away from the house in a straight line so that I had 2 miles to walk back. So he wanted that time to himself. And if he was exhausted, he said he would just walk out 2 miles and then walk back. So he always took that time to decompress. And then another one lives up in the Seattle area. He would go away from the city out into the nature and just take a hike for a couple hours. He said, hey, give me these couple of hours. And then when I check back into the house, I'm ready for you. And I will be such of a better spouse and parent. Those were just two things that really stuck with me, that, they convinced their family, or they informed their family and got their buy-in that, hey, I want to be the best that I can be, and I need to do this for myself. And again, it goes back to, hey, we got to take care of ourselves, because the more we take care of ourselves, the more we can serve and love others. And those are just two tips.
So we're talking about building a buffer of time and distance between the work life and the home life, so that when you do something, this, it's either walk or run as an example, you do something that kind of helps you transition out of work mindset and work mode and prepare yourself for home mindset and home mode. Is that kind of where you're going with the
Yes,
things?
absolutely. And I'll give you two other examples. Two other things I picked up at one of my workshops. I remember a guy stood up and said, he goes, I spend an excessive amount of time on my drive home looking in the rearview mirror and repeating to myself, work is back there. And he goes, for whatever reason, it works for me. He goes, by the time I get home, I have reminded myself, work's back there, family is in front of me, and that's where I'm headed. Now maybe he had a long commute, because a lot of times we need more time than that. That was the one example. I had another one on top of my mind. Rich, it just slipped.
It'll come back to you.
It may come back to me.
Yeah.
No, I do have the other one. Another one said, early in his career, all he wore when he was off duty, he wore his firefighting shirt or some fire shirt. You have a fire shirt on right now. I see the logo.
I do.
What he told me was he immediately changed out of his anything fire related, and never put anything fire related on during his off time. And that was his way of saying, work is work, home is home. Now, this guy was a super proud firefighter, very effective in his career, but that was his method of turning the switch off, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. This concept of self-care, how does like self-care improve the work-life balance? And then is this theoretical, or is there evidence that kind of supports this self-care concept?
Sure. Well, the self-care theory actually came out of the nursing profession. It started to be that, teach patients how to care for themselves so that we can prevent some disease. And if we think about, and then it led to different professions, such as like any therapist, psychological therapist, they take an oath that they have to care for themselves in order to serve their patients. And if they're not caring for their own mental health, they should not serve. So it led to that, to where, and then many studies have happened, and now it's evidence approach. And I used it as a method of when we take better care of ourselves, what really happens. And that led into a thing called spillover theory, to where, when we think about spillover, it's like simple things. It could be, if you had a fantastic experience during your shift work, you got some sleep, you did you went on a couple runs, they were very successful, you're in a great mood, does that spill over into your home life? Probably does, because we definitely know the opposite. If we're sleep deprived, does that spill over? And that spills over into being irritable. If we don't satisfy a need of sleep, it negatively spills over into our psychological mental mode, and it affects our emotional side. So when it came down to, is it evidence-based? Yes, evidence-based. The greater we care for ourselves, the greater we can care for others, right? Which is a different model than, and for firefighters, the oath of office, right? You promise to serve and protect your communities. And what I try to say is that, yes, but don't forget that you and your family are a part of that community. And when we look at our population, of number one killer in our population is preventable diseases. From type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, certain types of cancers. These are all preventable with changing our behaviors. And generally, it's about taking care of our physical needs. Could you imagine if we wiped all that out? Could you imagine if we wiped it out of the fire service? If we could control, what can we prevent? We understand, we can predict what's going to hurt us. And if we can predict it, it should be preventable, right? So we're predicting it, and we're starting to learn how to prevent it. And now it's a matter of, how do we get more and more and more people to take action on it, from that self-care. So to answer your question, is it evidence-based? Yes, it is. It's evidence-based. The greater we care for ourselves, the greater we will actually be able to care for others. Now, I'm not talking about one little data point on a chart, like, oh, but if I didn't stay up for 72 hours straight, I would have never been able to, take care of this situation. True. But we don't want to shorten our life, right? We want a long life, long career, and hopefully you want a long retirement. So we need to package all that in to how well do we do. And it all gets back to that, for me, it gets back to that self-care. It's like, hey, we're not just taking care of ourselves for today, we're taking care of ourselves for tomorrow too.
What are some of the signs and symptoms that a firefighter's balance is out of balance? Sometimes I think you can be out of balance and you don't see that you are, or you're in denial that you are. So therefore, maybe that puts some blinders on you. So if someone had to step out of themselves and kind of look, down from the corner of the room at themselves, what are some of the things that they might see in self-reflection that is a pretty good indicator that they've got a challenge with this balance in life?
Yeah, good, very good question. And there's a couple ways, and they can assess themselves. And I'll also share with you another way. They can go ask people.
Thank you, Dr. Donnie, for sharing your wisdom with us today. Remember, this was part one of a two-part interview, so be sure to check back next week for the conclusion of my discussion with Dr. Donnie. Since the start of the pandemic, I've had some amazing opportunities to present programs on a virtual platform to groups ranging in size from 6 to 400, with recorded playbacks being viewed over 26,000 times. Here's hoping that vaccinations reduce the number of cases and we return back to some form of normalcy. Here's what we have for upcoming training at this point in the game. On April 9th, I'll be presenting a live, in-person, hopefully, situational awareness program for the Kansas State Firefighters Association in Mulvane, Kansas. And thank you to the Kansas State Firefighter Association for inviting me back now multiple years. I really appreciate your support of my mission. April 12th, I'll be facilitating the Minnesota Virtual Training Series. This program will feature Chief Jerry Strike talking about difficult people and their organizational impacts. April 18th, I'll be presenting a virtual training program for the Alberta Fire Training Officers Association on the topic of training for failure. April 26th, I'll be facilitating the Minnesota Virtual Training Series. This program will feature John Kriesel talking about how he lost both of his legs in an IED explosion in Iraq and how he managed through the impact of that event. On May 2, I'll be presenting a live, hopefully, in-person situational awareness program for the Hilltop Hose Company just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. On May 10th, I'll be facilitating the Minnesota Virtual Training Series, this time featuring Randy Kern, talking about how to have an effective conflict coaching conversation to improve performance. On May 15th, I'll be doing a program, live in-person program for Electric Energy Company in California for their foreman on situational awareness. On May 25th, I'll be facilitating the Minnesota Virtual Training Series. This program will feature Peggy Young talking about strength finders. And on May 26th, I'll be presenting a live, in-person situational awareness program for the Utah Fire Chiefs Association in Salt Lake City, Utah. And thank you to the Utah Chiefs for bringing me back now multiple times. I appreciate your support of the mission. Thank you to the organizations that have allowed me to offer your members virtual training, and a special thanks to the agencies that have postponed programs in 2020 and now are patiently waiting to get rescheduled. If you're interested in hosting a virtual program or a live event, just click on the Contact Us tab on the top of the samatters.com homepage and I will give you a call. Finally, remember to check the show notes for how to subscribe to our newsletter, how to follow us on social media. There we share ideas about how to improve situational awareness, how to make better decisions under stress, and how to improve the skills of critical thinking and resilient problem solving. Well, that's it. Episode 365 of the Situational Awareness Matters show is complete. Thank you to my guest, Dr. Donnie Hutchinson. Remember, this is part one of a two-part episode, so be sure to come back next week for the conclusion. Thank you to our listeners and viewers for sharing some of your valuable time with me today. I really appreciate your support of the SA Matters mission. Be safe out there, and may the peace of the Lord and strong situational awareness be with you always.
You've been listening to the Situational Awareness Matters Show with Dr. Richard Gasaway. If you're interested in learning more about situational awareness, human factors, and decision-making under stress, visit his website, samatters.com. If you're interested in booking Dr. Gasaway for a program, or if you would like to be a guest on his show, click the Contact Us tab at the top of the homepage.